On the night of March 2nd, 2008, inside a small house on Leicester Street in Memphis, Tennessee, a man walked through the front door of his brother's home wearing the face of family. Before the sun rose on that devastating night, 6 people were dead. 3 of them were children. The only surviving witness, a 9-year-old boy, lay alone in a bathtub with a butcher knife buried deep in his skull, bleeding in the darkness and surrounded by the silence of his murdered family for nearly 2 full days. Against all odds, he survived, and when he finally opened his eyes, found his voice and spoke from his hospital bed, the single name he revealed changed everything. That is the story we are telling today on True Crime Web. Welcome back to True Crime Web, the channel dedicated to honoring the innocent, exposing the truth and making sure the names of those stolen from this world are spoken out loud and remembered forever. If you are new here, please take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss a single upload. Drop your city and country in the comments below. We genuinely love knowing where our True Crime Web family is watching from around the world. Now let us take you back to Memphis, Tennessee, and to a house on Leicester Street that still haunts the memory of an entire city. The air in Memphis, Tennessee was cold and heavy in the early days of March 2008. Memphis was a city of music, of loud streets, of energy and noise, and the constant pulse of urban life. But on Leicester Street, in a quiet residential neighborhood on the south side of the city, something deeply wrong had taken root. Inside a small house with metal bars on the windows. The house sat at 722 Leicester Street. From the outside it looked ordinary. Neighbors walked past it every day without a second thought. They noticed the front door sitting slightly open. They heard a radio playing softly inside. They saw the lights on behind the barred windows. Everything appeared normal. Nothing about what they were seeing gave them any reason to stop. And so the silence inside that house continued for 40 full hours. 40 hours of nobody knowing. 40 hours of a nightmare sealed behind an unlocked door. It was a woman named Erica Smith who finally broke that silence. She was the mother of one of Jesse Dotson's children, and she had been trying to reach the family for days without success. Nobody answered the phone. Nobody responded to her messages. Something felt deeply wrong in a way she could not explain, but absolutely could not ignore. She drove to the house on Leicester Street. She saw the storm door closed, but the heavy front door standing open behind it. She heard the radio still playing inside. She did not hear children. She did not hear laughter or movement or any of the sounds a house full of family should be making in the middle of the day. She called the police and requested a welfare check. She thought something was wrong. She had no way of knowing just how catastrophically right she was. On March the 5th, 2008, Officer Randall Davis responded to the call. He pulled up to 722 Leicester Street and climbed the porch steps. Before he even reached the door, something hit him. It was a smell. It was thick and heavy and deeply wrong. It was the smell of iron and rust and something older and darker underneath those, the unmistakable and terrible scent of blood that had been sitting in an enclosed space for 2 full days. He steeled himself and pushed the door open. He took 1 step inside, and the first thing his eyes found was a foot, just a foot, lying on the floor near the entrance. It belonged to 33-year-old Hollis Seals, who had been shot as he walked through the front door and had dropped right there where he stood, never having had a single moment to react or understand what was happening to him. Officer Davis moved deeper into the living room, and the full scale of what had happened inside that house began to reveal itself in the worst possible way. The floor was covered in blood, dark and dried into a thick crust across the carpet from nearly 2 days of sitting undisturbed. 30-year-old Jesse Dodson, the man who lived in this house, was found in a kneeling position with his body slumped against the sofa. He had been shot in the head and in the neck, but the medical evidence would later reveal something even more disturbing. Before those final fatal shots, Cecil had been shot in both legs. The killer had deliberately crippled him first. He wanted Cecil on the floor. He wanted Cecil unable to run or fight or protect anyone. He wanted him to stay exactly where he was and watch what came next. Near Cecil's body lay 27-year-old Marissa Williams, Cecil's fiancée and the mother of his children. She had been shot 5 times. Her body was slumped over the body of 22-year-old Chandra Robertson, the girlfriend of Hollis Seals, who had also been shot in the legs before being shot fatally. The pattern was as clear as it was horrifying. Every adult in that room had been deliberately disabled before being killed. The killer had turned the living room of a family home into a theater of calculated, methodical execution. Officer Davis moved toward the back of the house with his hand on his weapon, hoping desperately that the children who lived in this home had somehow found a way out, had somehow escaped through a window or a back door, had somehow been somewhere else that night. The hope did not survive long. In the first bedroom he found young Samario Dotson. Samario had not been shot. The killer had made a deliberate choice to use different methods for the children, and the reason for that choice would become clear during the investigation. Samario had been beaten with a wooden board and stabbed repeatedly. The struggle in that room had been prolonged and horrific. There were palm prints pressed in blood on the bedroom walls, evidence of a small child fighting desperately and ferociously for his life in the dark against a grown man who outweighed him many times over. In the second bedroom, officers found young Cecil Dodson II. He had been stabbed 7 times, with most of the wounds concentrated on his head. The cruelty embedded in that detail shook even the most experienced detectives who responded to the scene that day. But nothing in that house, and nothing in the careers of most of the officers who responded that morning, could have prepared them for what Officer Davis found when he stepped into the bathroom.
He turned his head, and the next thing we saw was one of the most horrible things I've ever seen. It was a knife stuck embedded in his skull.
He looked into the bathtub. He saw a small body. It was 9-year-old CJ, Cecil's son. The boy was covered in blood from wounds to his throat, his chest, and his head. A butcher knife was buried deep in his skull, the blade driven so far into the bone that it had not moved in the nearly 2 days since it had been put there. Officer Davis processed what he was seeing and concluded that the boy was gone. Then something happened that he would describe for the rest of his life as the moment that stopped his heart. CJ moved his eye, just barely, just slightly, but unmistakably. The 9-year-old boy was alive. He had been lying in that bathtub for nearly 2 full days. He had been bleeding in the complete darkness and silence of a house full of the dead bodies of his family. He was still there. He was still fighting. He was still breathing. The paramedics rushed to the scene, and CJ was transported immediately to the hospital. And in a crib in one of the bedrooms, officers also found 2-month-old baby Sanaya. She had been attacked as well, her tiny skull fractured, her leg wounded, but she too was breathing. She too was alive. 2 survivors pulled from the wreckage of an incomprehensible massacre. The medical teams worked through the night to save them both, and as the children fought for their lives in the hospital, the detectives sealed the house on Leicester Street and began the grim and meticulous work of trying to understand what had happened inside it. If you are finding this story as important and powerful as we do here at True Crime Web, please take a second right now to hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it now and join our growing True Crime Web family. The forensics team that processed 722 Leicester Street documented a crime scene that told a deeply revealing story once investigators understood how to read it correctly. The first critical detail was the layout of the house itself. The windows had metal security bars. The front door had been effectively blocked by Hollis Seals' body. There was no easy exit from the living room once the shooting began. The killer had used the architecture of the house itself as a trap, and that level of spatial awareness pointed immediately towards someone who knew the house well, someone who had been inside it before, someone who understood the floor plan and had factored it into what they intended to do. The second critical detail was the weapons. The killer had brought a handgun to the house, but for the children he had used knives pulled from the kitchen drawer and wooden boards found inside the home itself. Investigators noted that whoever committed these murders knew exactly where the kitchen knives were kept. They did not search for them in a panic. They went directly to the drawer. This was not a stranger operating in an unfamiliar space. This was someone who had spent time in this house, who had eaten meals in this kitchen, who knew where everything was stored. The murder weapon was not brought from outside for the children. It was retrieved from inside the home with the confidence of someone completely familiar with their surroundings. The third and perhaps most strategically important detail was the staging. After the killing was complete, someone had spent a significant amount of time carefully rearranging elements of the crime scene. The victim's clothing had been disturbed in a way that mimicked gang-related disrespect. Marijuana had been placed in Cecil Dotson's hand. Crack cocaine had been placed near Chandra Robertson's body. Shell casings had been collected from the floor. The knife handles had been tampered with in an attempt to eliminate fingerprints. This was not the frantic, panicked behavior of a first-time killer. This was the deliberate, calculated work of someone who understood how homicide investigations operated, someone who had experience with the criminal justice system, someone who specifically wanted police to look at Memphis street gangs rather than at the family itself. The staging was sophisticated, but it was not sophisticated enough. To understand the full weight of what happened on Leicester Street, you have to go back. You have to look at the man the family called Junior. You have to trace the long, dark road that turned a brother into a butcher, because this did not happen in an instant. This was the product of decades of accumulated anger, bitterness, violence, and a festering sense of personal injustice that had been growing in silence for years until it finally became something that could no longer be contained. Jesse Dodson Jr. was born into a household already fractured by violence. His father, Jesse Sr., was a physically abusive man with heavy hands and a short temper. Young Jesse watched his father beat his mother from the time he was barely old enough to form memories. He absorbed those lessons early and deeply. He learned that power came from inflicting pain. He learned that fists were a language. The family eventually relocated to Memphis, settling in the tough neighborhoods of South Memphis, where money was scarce and peace was even scarcer. When Jesse was 6 years old, his mother finally left his father and took the children with her. The physical separation from his father may have removed Jesse from one source of violence, but the damage to his developing sense of the world was already permanent. Jesse moved through 10 different schools without ever finding stability or belonging. He repeated the 4th grade twice. He dropped out of school entirely in the 8th grade, stepping out into the world at barely a teenager, with no education, no direction, and an enormous reservoir of unprocessed anger. By the time he was 15 years old, police already knew his name. His criminal behavior was not petty or opportunistic. It was personal and threatening. In 1990, he was formally charged with making violent threats against his own mother after she attempted to discipline him. 1 month after that incident, he punched a 13-year-old boy in the face and attempted to extort $25 from him. The pattern that would define his entire life was already fully formed before he was old enough to drive. Jesse Dodson wanted what he wanted, and anyone who stood between him and what he wanted paid a physical price. By 1994, Jesse was 19 years old and living in the streets, fully embedded in the drug trade and the dangerous dynamics that came with it. He attempted to sell a man named Haley Cox soap shavings in place of actual drugs, a cheap deception that went badly wrong when Cox discovered the fraud. The two men argued. The argument escalated into a confrontation, and Jesse Dodson did not simply walk away angry. He killed Haley Cox. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He eventually entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder and received a sentence of 18 years in state prison. He was 19 years old. He would spend the next 14 years of his life behind bars, locked away during what should have been the most formative and productive years of his adult life. Prison did not rehabilitate Jesse Dodson. For a man with his particular psychology, the experience of incarceration did not soften or redirect the anger already burning inside him. It refined it. It concentrated it. It gave it specific targets and specific grievances to attach itself to. Jesse served 14 years of his 18-year sentence. During those 14 years, his institutional record was alarming. He accumulated 29 separate disciplinary violations. He was violent with other inmates. He stabbed a fellow prisoner in the neck. He was abusive towards staff. He was a man in a constant state of conflict, a man who experienced the world as a series of threats to be neutralized and slights to be answered. But the most psychologically significant thing that happened to Jesse Dodson during those 14 years was not what happened inside the prison walls. It was what did not happen outside them. His mother visited him exactly one time in 14 years. One single visit across a decade and a half of incarceration. His brother Cecil, the younger brother he had grown up alongside, never came to see him once. Not on a birthday, not on a holiday, not even once in 14 years. Jesse sat in his cell and he counted the absences. He measured the silence of his family's indifference and let it calcify into something much harder and much colder than ordinary sadness. He felt abandoned. He felt discarded. He felt that the people who shared his blood had decided he was not worth the drive or the time. The bitterness grew in the quiet of his cell like something with roots, slowly and deeply and completely invisibly, until it had spread into every corner of his thinking. And while Jesse sat in his cell nursing that bitterness, his younger brother Cecil was building a life. Cecil Dotson was 3 years younger than Jesse. He was not a man without complications of his own. He was a member of the gangster disciples, and he had lived a dangerous street life. But Cecil was also working. He was employed as a maintenance man. He was supporting his children. He was attending church. He had rented the house on Leicester Street specifically to give his family a stable home. He was trying to turn his life towards something better, and the people around him could see it and respected him for the effort. To Jesse, watching all of this from behind prison walls, Cecil's relative success was not something to celebrate. It was something to resent. It was evidence of a cosmic injustice. How could Cecil have a home and a family and respect while Jesse had nothing? How could the family invest their love and attention in Cecil while Jesse sat forgotten in a cage? The jealousy was not rational, but it was real, and it was growing. In August of 2007, Jesse Dodson was released from prison on parole. He was 32 years old. He had spent nearly half of his entire life incarcerated. He walked out with nothing, no money, no home, no foundation of any kind. He was placed with his sister Nicole, who was openly terrified of him. Everyone in the family was. His reputation preceded him everywhere he went. He was a man whose capacity for violence was not theoretical or rumored. It was documented and convicted and real. He began doing painting work with his father, but the work did not satisfy him and the money was never enough. He started spending time with Cecil. They drank together. They watched games together. On the surface, they were two brothers trying to find their way back to some version of a relationship after years of separation. But underneath every interaction, the volcano was rumbling. Cecil would make comments, casually and without malice, reminding Jesse that he had just gotten out of prison, referencing his own life in ways that Jesse experienced as deliberate taunting. Every mention of Cecil's apartment, his children, his employment, his standing in the community landed in Jesse's chest like something sharp. He was a man who had convinced himself that the world owed him everything he had lost during those 14 years. And Cecil, simply by living his life, seemed to be proof that the world had paid that debt to the wrong person. Jesse was looking for a reason to snap. He was a man standing at the edge of something terrible, and the people around him either could not see it clearly enough or could not bring themselves to believe that the man they called Junior was truly capable of what he was becoming capable of. Cecil, operating from a genuine desire to help his brother reintegrate, made the decision to bring Jesse fully into his home and his daily life. He shared his food. He opened his door. He invited his brother into the most intimate spaces of his world. He did not know he was inviting something that had already decided to consume everything around it. He did not know that the man sitting across from him at his kitchen table was quietly cataloguing every perceived slight, every moment of feeling small, every reminder that Cecil had what Jesse believed should have been his. The debt Jesse had constructed entirely inside his own mind was approaching the moment of collection. On Sunday, March the 2nd, 2008, the house at 722 Leicester Street was alive with the energy of a family gathering. The smell of charcoal and grilled meat drifted through the small yard. The Memphis Tigers basketball game was on the television. The refrigerator was stocked with cold drinks. Cecil was there with his fiancée Marissa and their children. His friends Hollis Seals and Chandra Robertson had come to join them. Jesse was there too, sitting on the edge of the group, drinking steadily, watching everything, listening to his brother talk and laugh and be the center of the room in the way that Jesse had never managed to be. Every word Cecil spoke that evening was another needle under Jesse's skin. Every laugh was another reminder. The drinking continued from the afternoon well into the evening, and as the alcohol worked through the room, the already thin layer of civility between the two brothers began to erode. The argument that eventually exploded had been building for months, possibly years. It started over small things, questions of respect and reputation, of who was tougher and who commanded more fear in the streets. Then it shifted onto more dangerous ground. There were rumors circulating in the gang world that Cecil had violated the rules of his organization, that he had cooperated with law enforcement in some capacity against a fellow member. In the world both brothers inhabited, that specific accusation carried the weight of a death sentence. Jesse kept returning to it. He kept pushing at it. He would not let it rest. He was not doing this to protect gang protocol. He was doing it because he had found the pressure point, the place where he could make Cecil feel small, the place where he could finally hold something over his brother's head. Earlier that same evening, the group had gone to retrieve a handgun, a Smith & Wesson .380 caliber semi-automatic that Hollis Seals had left with an acquaintance. They brought it back to the house. There were other weapons already present. There was a blue revolver on the kitchen counter. There was Cecil's own sawed-off shotgun stored behind the couch. The house was not simply a home that evening. It was a room full of loaded weapons, a room full of alcohol, and a room with Jesse Dodson sitting in it watching his brother with eyes that had been calculating for months. Cecil, growing tired of Jesse's escalating aggression and wanting to assert himself as the man of his own house, reached behind the couch and pulled out the sawed-off shotgun. He did not point it at Jesse. He waved it in the air, a gesture of dominance, a way of saying without words that this was his home and his rules, and the conversation was finished. Then, believing the point had been made, he set the weapon down. He turned his back. It was the last mistake Cecil Dotson would ever make. The moment Cecil turned away, the volcano erupted. Jesse reached for the handgun. He raised it. He fired. The first bullet was for Hollis Seals, who happened to be walking through the front door at that exact moment and was shot in the mouth and the chest before he had the chance to register what was happening. He fell at the threshold and did not move again. Cecil spun around and found himself looking directly into the barrel of the gun in his own brother's hand. Jesse fired. Cecil went down. But Jesse was not finished. He stood over his younger brother and fired again and again, shooting Cecil in the head, the neck, and the chest. Then, with a coldness that left the investigating detectives struggling to find adequate language for it, he shot Cecil in both legs to ensure that his brother could not crawl away or attempt to reach anyone. He wanted Cecil to feel the floor beneath him. He wanted him to understand completely what was happening before it ended. Marissa Williams and Chandra Robertson were trapped. The barred windows offered no escape. The front door was blocked by Hollis Seals' body. There was nowhere to go and no way out. They begged for their lives. They cried out for the children sleeping in the back rooms. Jesse turned the gun on them with the same methodical logic he had applied to everyone else. He shot them both in the legs first, removing their ability to run, ensuring they would stay exactly where they were. Then he shot them until they were still. 27-year-old Marissa Williams, the mother of Cecil's children, was shot 5 times. 22-year-old Chandra Robertson was shot 4 times. The living room of a family home had been transformed into a slaughterhouse in a matter of minutes. 4 adults were dead or dying on the floor. The house was silent except for the television still playing in the background. Jesse stood in the middle of what he had done and processed a single problem. The house was not empty. From the back rooms came the small sounds of children, movement, a whimper. 9-year-old CJ, young Cecil, and baby Sanaya were in the house. They were alive. They had heard everything, and CJ at least had seen enough to know exactly who was responsible. In Jesse Dotson's mind, the calculation was immediate and cold. His freedom was worth more than the lives of his brother's children. He walked to the kitchen drawer and pulled it open. He selected a butcher knife and a switchblade. He had no more desire to use the gun. Bullets were loud. Bullets left specific and traceable evidence. He wanted something quieter and more direct. He walked down the narrow hallway toward the back of the house where the children were. 9-year-old CJ was in the hallway. He had seen his uncle shoot his father. He had seen the smoke and the blood and the aftermath of the worst thing a child can witness. He had tried to reach a phone to call for help, but Jesse moved faster and blocked the hallway completely. CJ looked up at the man blocking his path. He was 9 years old, and he was absolutely terrified, and he said the only thing he could think to say in that moment. He told his uncle that he loved him. Jesse Dodson looked down at his 9-year-old nephew and spoke 3 words in response. He said, "No, you don't." Then he slashed the boy's throat. He followed CJ into the bathroom and forced him to lean over the bathtub. He raised the butcher knife and drove it into the top of the boy's skull with enough force that the blade buried itself deep in the bone and would not come free. Jesse left it there, embedded in the child's head, and walked away. He believed CJ was dead. He was wrong. He moved through the remaining bedrooms. He beat and stabbed young Samario and young Cecil II with the boards and the knives from the house, attacking his own nephews with a sustained and methodical violence that continued long after any rational person would have stopped. The children fought back. They left their handprints on the walls in their own blood. They screamed until they could not scream anymore. 2-month-old Sanaya was attacked in her crib, her tiny body wounded with the same weapons her uncle had used on her brothers. Jesse Dodson had made his choice. He had decided to wipe out every living witness to what he had done, including children who called him by a family name. When the killing was finished, Jesse Dodson did not run. He spent hours inside that house staging the scene with the careful deliberateness of a man who had spent 14 years learning how criminal investigations worked. He pulled down the victim's clothing in the manner associated with gang-related disrespect. He placed drugs on the bodies to direct investigative attention towards street-level gang activity. He collected as many shell casings as he could find. He tampered with the knife handles to eliminate fingerprints. He constructed a scene designed to make Memphis homicide detectives think about territory and drug debts rather than family dynamics and personal grudges. He was thorough. He was patient. He worked through the night. When he finally left the house in the early morning hours, he did not have a car available to him. He went into the yard and found CJ's small yellow bicycle. He climbed onto it, a grown man on a child's bicycle, and rode through the pre-dawn streets of Memphis to his girlfriend's house several blocks away. When he arrived, he cleaned the bicycle with bleach. He cleaned the sink he vomited into with bleach. He went to bed. He slept. And for the next 40 hours, he moved through the world as a grieving brother, returning to the crime scene with family members, crying openly, performing grief with the same methodical calculation he had applied to everything else. He thought he was a ghost. He believed he had constructed something invisible and impenetrable. He was 40 hours and one 9-year-old boy away from learning how catastrophically wrong he was. CJ woke up in a hospital bed. He was in pain that most adults could not have endured and survived. He was disoriented and frightened and surrounded by strangers in a clinical environment that smelled nothing like home. But he was alive. Against every reasonable medical expectation, the 9-year-old boy who had been lying in a bathtub with a butcher knife in his skull for nearly 2 full days was alive and conscious and capable of speech. Lieutenant Caroline Mason sat by his bedside and waited with the patience of someone who understood the weight of what this child carried. She did not rush him. She did not push. She simply waited. And when CJ finally spoke, he did not speak about strangers. He did not describe gang members or unknown intruders. He said his uncle did it. He said Uncle Junior shot his daddy. He said Uncle Junior put the knife in his head. The search for a ghost was over in a single sentence spoken by a child who refused to die. The police brought Jesse Dodson into the Homicide Bureau for questioning. He was calm and arrogant in the interview room, settling into the chair with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed his staging had worked and that his performance of grief had been convincing enough to put him beyond suspicion. He denied everything. He claimed that gang members do not speak to police and that he had nothing to say. He leaned back and let his arrogance fill the room. He was not prepared for what happened next. Deputy Director Tony Armstrong walked into the interview room. He did not raise his voice. He did not present an argument or lay out a list of evidence. He simply pressed play on a recording device and let CJ's voice fill the room. Jesse Dodson's face changed in a way that no performance could have concealed. The arrogance collapsed. His body began to shake. He heard his 9-year-old nephew's voice describing the attack in precise and accurate detail. He heard his own name spoken with the clarity of a child who had looked directly into his face and would never forget what he saw there. Jesse asked for his mother. She was brought in. She took his hand and looked at him with tears streaming down her face and asked him the question the entire city of Memphis was asking. "Why the babies, Junior? Why the babies?" Jesse did not look away. He had no more lies left. He said he killed the adults because of an argument, and then he said he killed the children for one reason and one reason only, because they saw him. Jesse Dodson was formally charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. The trial began in 2010. The courtroom was filled with the families of the victims, seated on hard wooden benches, waiting for a formal accounting of what had been done to their loved ones. Jesse, in a final and desperate act of self-preservation, recanted his confession entirely. He constructed a new story, claiming that an unknown gang member had committed the murders while he hid under a bed, too frightened to intervene or call for help. He asked the jury to believe that a man with his history of violence had simply cowered in the dark while 6 people were slaughtered around him. The jury heard the recording of his full confession. They heard the medical examiners describe in clinical and devastating detail the nature and pattern of every wound on every victim. They heard the forensic evidence that demolished every element of the staging he had spent hours constructing. And then they saw CJ. He was 11 years old by the time the case went to trial. He walked to the witness stand in front of a packed courtroom. He looked at the man who had driven a knife into his skull and left him for dead in a bathtub. He did not flinch. He did not waver. He told the court exactly what had happened on the night of March the 2nd, 2008, in the same clear and unwavering voice he had used in that hospital room 2 years earlier. He described the gunfire. He described the screams. He described looking up at his uncle's face in the hallway. He described hearing the 3 words his uncle said before the blade came down. The courtroom sat in absolute silence. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. They did not need any more time than that. Jesse Dodson was found guilty on all counts. 6 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted murder. The judge sentenced him to 6 death sentences, making him the individual with the most death penalty sentences handed down by a single court in the recorded history of the state of Tennessee. He received an additional 120 years for the attempted murders of the 3 children who survived. The court wanted to ensure with mathematical certainty that Jesse Dodson would never breathe free air again for as long as he lived. As of the time of this video, Jesse Dodson remains incarcerated at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, Tennessee. He has filed numerous appeals over the years, challenging his confession, his legal representation, and the sufficiency of the evidence against him. Every appeal has been denied. The truth of Leicester Street is not something that argument or paperwork can move. Before we close this chapter, we have to say something clearly and directly. This story belongs to the people who were lost, and we will not let this video end without saying their names out loud one final time. Cecil Dotson was a 30-year-old father who was actively trying to build a better life for his children. He deserved decades more of that life. Marissa Williams was a 27-year-old mother who loved her children until the very last moment of her life. Hollis Seals and Chandra Robertson were young people with entire futures ahead of them who came to spend an evening with friends and never went home. Young Cecil II and young Samario were boys who should have grown into men, should have played sports and fallen in love and had children of their own and lived long, full lives that belonged entirely to them. They were robbed of all of it, and we will never stop saying their names on this channel. This case carries lessons that are worth sitting with long after this video ends. The first lesson is about the red flags that go unacknowledged because acknowledging them feels disloyal to family. Jesse Dodson was not a hidden danger. He was a documented, convicted, repeatedly violent man whose own sister was openly terrified of him. The people who loved Cecil knew who Junior was. But blood creates a powerful and sometimes dangerous obligation to extend trust that has not been earned and grace that has not been merited. When someone has shown you repeatedly and specifically who they are, that information must be taken seriously regardless of what name they share with you. The second lesson is about what unaddressed cycles of violence produce across generations. Jesse witnessed brutality as a child and absorbed it as a language. He spent 14 years in an environment that offered no tools for processing or redirecting that language. He emerged from prison with every original wound still open and festering, and now aimed with specific precision at the people he held responsible for his suffering. Without genuine intervention, those cycles do not break, they accelerate. The final and most important lesson belongs to CJ. A 9-year-old child survived something that should not have been survivable, endured 40 hours of darkness and pain and silence that no human being should ever have to endure, and then found the courage to walk into a courtroom at 11 years old and tell the truth in front of the man who tried to silence him permanently. CJ did not let the monster win. His voice, small and steady and absolutely certain, was the thing that brought Jesse Dodson to justice. His courage is the light this story carries forward. May Cecil Dotson, Marissa Williams, Hollis Seals, Chandra Robertson, young Cecil II, and young Samario rest in eternal and undisturbed peace. May CJ, Cedric, and baby Sanaya find healing and wholeness in every year that follows. And may the house on Leicester Street, long since torn down and cleared from the earth, remain in our memory, not as a place of horror, but as a reminder of why we must protect one another, speak the truth even when it is terrifying to do so, and never let the names of the innocent be forgotten. If this story moved you in any way, please hit the like button right now and leave a comment below telling us what stayed with you after watching. Your engagement is what keeps True Crime Web going, and what helps us reach the people who need to hear these stories most. If you are not yet part of our True Crime Web family, please subscribe right now and hit that notification bell so you are always the first to know when we release a new video. We work every single day to bring you stories that matter, told with the honesty and the deep respect that every victim deserves. Drop your city below so we know where you are watching from today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And we will see you in the next one on True Crime Web.